The Civil War was over. The Confederacy had fallen. Slavery had been destroyed. 4 million enslaved people were free. So the story should have ended there. But in many ways, the real battle was only beginning. Because once the fighting stopped, America faced a question even deeper than how to win a war. What kind of nation would rise from the ruins? Would the South be rebuilt on freedom, citizenship, and equal justice? Or would the old order return under a different name? For a brief and extraordinary moment, the United States attempted something revolutionary. Formerly enslaved people reunited families, built churches and schools, voted, held office, and helped reshape the political future of the South. Congress passed new amendments. The Constitution itself was transformed. The country tried to make real the promises it had spoken for generations. And then came the backlash. This is the story of Reconstruction, the era historians often call America's second founding. It was an attempt not merely to rebuild the South, but to rebuild the meaning of the United States. And it remains one of the most powerful, tragic, and unfinished chapters in American history. When the war ended in 1865, the South was shattered. Its cities, railroads, farms, and economy had been badly damaged. But the most important transformation was not material. It was human. Millions of Black Americans who had been held as property were now free. Freedom arrived with joy, confusion, hope, and danger all at once. Formerly enslaved men and women searched for husbands, wives, children, and parents who had been sold away from them, sometimes years earlier. Families that had been broken by slavery tried to find one another again. Many left plantations to test what freedom actually meant. Many chose new names. Many demanded wages for their work. Many wanted land, legal marriage, education, and protection from violence. They were not asking for luxury. They were asking for the basic building blocks of a free life. The federal government created the Freedmen's Bureau to help former slaves and poor whites with food, labor contracts, education, and legal matters. Across the South, Black communities and Northern reformers worked to establish schools, churches, and local institutions. Education became one of the first great missions of emancipation. People who had once been forbidden even to read now pursued learning with astonishing determination. But freedom alone did not settle the future. The central question remained unresolved. Would emancipation lead to real equality, or only to a new form of subordination? Reconstruction began as a contest over what freedom would actually mean in the United States. That contest became even more intense after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in April 1865, only days after General Robert E. Lee surrendered. Lincoln had imagined a relatively lenient restoration of the Union, though by the end of the war he also understood that slavery had to die and that some new order had to emerge from the conflict. His death placed Reconstruction in the hands of Vice President Andrew Johnson. Johnson had remained loyal to the Union, but he was a Southern Democrat from Tennessee with deeply racist views and little sympathy for Black equality. He moved quickly to restore the former Confederate states with surprisingly little punishment for their rebellion. He issued broad pardons, allowed former Southern elites to reclaim influence, and let new state governments form rapidly. The results were immediate and disturbing. Across the South, these governments passed Black codes, laws meant to restrict the freedom of Black Americans. These codes limited movement, constrained labor, and attempted to force freed people back into systems of dependency that looked alarmingly close to slavery. The legal institution of slavery was gone, but Southern white elites were determined to preserve racial hierarchy by any means available. This enraged many in Congress, especially the radical Republicans. Leaders such as Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner believed the war had to mean more than reunion. They believed it had to produce transformation. They argued that if the nation simply restored the old ruling class to power, then the sacrifices of the Civil War would have been betrayed. And so Reconstruction became a struggle between two competing visions. One wanted quick restoration. The other wanted a new birth of freedom. Congress gradually took control of Reconstruction away from Johnson and began to remake the nation through law and constitutional change. First came the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery throughout the United States. This was the legal death of the institution that had defined American contradiction from the beginning. Then came the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which declared that Black Americans were citizens and were entitled to equal protection under the law. Then came the 14th Amendment, one of the most important amendments in American history. It established birthright citizenship and promised due process and equal protection. In effect, it transformed the Constitution into a more powerful instrument for defending individual rights against unjust state governments. Finally came the 15th Amendment, which declared that states could not deny the right to vote on the basis of race. These measures were revolutionary. Before the Civil War, the Constitution had tolerated slavery and left enormous power in the hands of the states. After Reconstruction, the Constitution was rewritten around freedom, citizenship, and political rights. This is why historians often call Reconstruction America's second founding. The nation was not merely patched back together. It was fundamentally redefined. Congress also divided the South into military districts and required former Confederate states to write new constitutions and ratify the 14th Amendment before full readmission to the Union. For a moment, it seemed possible that the United States might become what it had always claimed to be, a republic grounded in equal citizenship. This was the most hopeful and most radical phase of Reconstruction. Black Americans did not wait passively for freedom to be handed to them. They organized. They built communities. They formed political associations. They attended conventions. They demanded rights, protection, and full participation in public life. For the first time in American history, large numbers of Black men voted across the South. Hundreds served in state legislatures. Some entered Congress. Hiram Revels and Blanche K. Bruce served in the United States Senate from Mississippi. Others became judges, sheriffs, school officials, and local leaders. The idea of a multiracial democracy, so long denied, was no longer abstract. For a brief time, it was becoming real. Reconstruction governments, despite enormous opposition, made meaningful changes. They expanded public education, rebuilt infrastructure, revised tax systems, and attempted to modernize Southern society. In many places, they created the first statewide public school systems the South had ever known. Black churches became pillars of community life, places of faith, organization, learning, and leadership. Families long denied legal recognition under slavery formalized marriages. Communities pooled money and labor to build schools and institutions for future generations. This was not chaos. It was nation-building. And it showed what America might have become if Reconstruction had been protected and sustained. But the promise of Reconstruction was fragile. It depended on federal enforcement, Northern political will, and protection against the violent forces gathering against it. To many former Confederates and white supremacists, Reconstruction was unbearable. Slavery was gone. Black citizens were voting. Black office holders were shaping public life. The old order had been broken, so they launched a counterattack. White supremacist organizations such as the Ku Klux Klan and similar groups used terror as a political weapon. They murdered local leaders, assaulted Black families, intimidated voters, and attacked anyone who supported Reconstruction. This was not random lawlessness. It was organized violence designed to destroy democracy by force. The goal was clear. If Black citizenship could not be defeated in law, it would be crushed through fear. Congress responded at times with strength. Federal enforcement acts gave the government power to suppress terrorist violence, and President Ulysses S. Grant used federal authority against the Klan in the early 1870s. In some places, these efforts worked. For a time, federal intervention protected elections and disrupted organized terror. But the commitment of the North began to weaken. Many white Northerners grew tired of the struggle. Some lost interest in black rights. Some became distracted by economic troubles and political scandals. Others simply wanted sectional peace more than justice. Reconstruction's enemies understood that they did not need to win immediately. They only needed to exhaust the will of those defending it. And slowly that exhaustion spread. By the mid-1870s, white Southern Democrats, often calling themselves redeemers, were retaking power state by state. They claimed to be restoring order and good government, but what they were really restoring was white control. Violence, fraud, intimidation, and propaganda became tools of political conquest. Armed groups operated openly in some states, helping to overthrow or paralyze Reconstruction governments. The experiment in interracial democracy was being attacked in broad daylight. The final turning point came with the disputed presidential election of 1876. It was one of the most contested elections in American history. To resolve it, political leaders struck what is commonly called the Compromise of 1877. In exchange for recognizing Rutherford B. Hayes as president, the federal government withdrew the remaining troops from the South. That decision did not invent white supremacy in the South. It abandoned the struggle against it. Without federal enforcement, Reconstruction governments collapsed. Black citizens were left vulnerable to hostile state regimes determined to dismantle the gains of the previous decade. The revolution did not fail because its ideals lacked power. It failed because the nation refused to defend them long enough. The war had destroyed slavery, but Reconstruction had tried to build freedom, and that project was now being left to die. After Reconstruction ended, the South built a new racial order. Through segregation, disenfranchisement, convict leasing, discriminatory laws, and racial terror, white Southern governments stripped away much of what Reconstruction had tried to create. This would become the era known as Jim Crow, and yet Reconstruction still mattered profoundly. Its constitutional amendments survived. The 13th abolished slavery. The 14th established birthright citizenship and equal protection. The 15th declared voting rights could not be denied on the basis of race. Even when the country failed to enforce these principles, they remained in the Constitution as promises future generations could fight to reclaim. In the 20th century, civil rights activists, lawyers, and reformers would return to Reconstruction's amendments again and again. The unfinished work of that era became the foundation of later struggles for justice. This is why Reconstruction matters so deeply. It was not simply an aftermath. It was a test of whether the United States could become a real multiracial democracy. For a brief moment, that future seemed possible. Then the nation retreated from it, and so Reconstruction became what many historians call America's unfinished revolution. It raised questions the country never fully escaped. Who counts as a full citizen? Who receives the protection of the law? What does democracy mean if violence can nullify the vote? Can a nation built on liberty truly extend liberty to all? Those questions did not vanish in 1877. In many ways, America is still answering them. Reconstruction was not a footnote to the Civil War. It was the struggle over what the Civil War had meant. Was the war only about restoring the Union? Or was it about transforming the Republic? Could freedom mean more than the end of slavery? Could citizenship cross the color line? Could democracy survive the fury of those who had always feared equality? For a brief and luminous moment, the answer seemed to be yes. Formerly enslaved people built lives, communities, and institutions out of the wreckage of slavery. Congress rewrote the Constitution. The nation came closer than ever before to aligning its laws with its ideals. America was given a chance to become something better than it had been. That is what makes Reconstruction so inspiring. And that is what makes its collapse so tragic. Because the story of Reconstruction is not just about what America achieved. It is also about what America refused to protect. It is the story of a revolution begun, a democracy imagined, and a promise only partially fulfilled. That is why Reconstruction deserves to be remembered as America's second founding, and why it still feels unfinished today.